para terminar em grande estilo, ouvindo um pouco mais a experiência da sabedoria, tanto intelectual quanto conhecimento moral, de uma figura formidável que encantou a todos nós nesses 2 dias. O Yuri Maltsev é pesquisador do Mises Institute, é professor de economia no Carnegie College, trabalhou na equipe da reforma econômica de Gorbachev, antes de ter desertado para os Estados Unidos em 1989. Ele é autor e coautor de 15 livros, bem como recebedor do Luminary Award of the Free Market Foundation. Então, eu chamo ao palco o Yuri.
So it looks like I am the last but big obstacle between now and freedom. And so we will talk about perestroika. Perestroika, that was economic and political reforms which ended the deadliest socialist experiment. This year, 2017, is 100th anniversary of the deadliest socialist experiment in the history of human race. And so we will talk a little bit about perestroika, which I was pretty lucky to be in the middle of. Well, at first, the perestroika was designed to save socialism, You can see, for example, here, it said that perestroika is continuation of what began in October of 1917. So it is to build better society, to strengthen socialism. So that was the idea of Mr. Gorbachev. You can see Mr. Gorbachev, he was a true communist. He made this famous report about perestroika and glasnost. It's also pretty interesting picture because this is the only picture of Mr. Gorbachev that I saw without his birthmark. You can see that the powerful Soviet Union could remove birthmarks. At first, his idea was that socialism is very good system. It's very good system, but people are bad. People are drinking, people are violating labor discipline, and so he began to fight people again. They were fighting people for 74 years before him. In the process, they murdered anywhere from 45 to 61 million people, and he still believed that that's people's fault. Some humanists, his point was that Lenin was very good. And I looked at Lenin's works, and in which he wrote, for example, that from Tsars, we inherited very poor human material. So people were not people, they were human material, which only can be mended, enhanced by mass shootings and forced labor. So that was a humanist in him. And so Mr. Gorbachev began at first with the fight with the booze. So his point was that alcohol is the obstacle of true socialism. And they almost prohibited. They did it in the worst kind of scenario. They didn't prohibit it altogether, but they shut down 90% of liquor stores. So the remaining 10 would have lines, multi-kilometer lines of people who were trying to get what they want. I was, remember, I was sent to Yakutsk. Yakutsk is capital of Republic of Sakha. It's the far east of Soviet Union, near Alaska already. Yeah, they have a joke in Sakha that who is the worst enemy of Sakha people? And the answer was Alexander II. And I was thinking, Alexander II, I mean, he was one of the nicest tsars. And I asked why. He said because he sold Alaska but didn't sell Yakutia. So I went there, and it was minus 46 Celsius temperature. Minus 46. And I counted 7 blocks long line of people trying to get 2 little bottles of vodka. They wouldn't give you more. Only 2 little people were jumping up and down just to preserve what's left of their life in them. So these were the posters of that time. So that means this on the left is a person's inner self. And on the right, you can see that this wrench is broken because of his drinking. And this is Lithuanian poster. You can see there's a communism, there's a wall behind which is communism is hiding, and all these drunkards would not be admitted there. So this is two policies, major policies, was perestroika and glasnost. We talked about glasnost a little bit yesterday. Glasnost means openness, and perestroika means economic reforms. And economic reforms were initiated by Abel Aganbegyan. Abel Aganbegyan was, we called him the biggest economist in the world because he was even bigger than me. He was at least 200 kilograms. And Mr. Aganbegyan, he came up with these reforms of perestroika, which were very ill-devised, half-hearted, misimplemented. Everything which could go wrong went wrong, and even things which couldn't go wrong also went wrong. So Mr. Aganbegyan definitely, I remember him saying, for example, that we need to build Swedish model of socialism. And Mr. Gorbachev even didn't believe that. He said, Abel, where you will get all the Swedes from? Who will build it? Yes, who will build it? All these drunken people. And so they, at first they prohibited it, and then they realized that Soviet Union is collapsing. So they began, after that, as a campaign, they began to sell vodka even in toy stores and gas stations and banks and everywhere else. So that was a pretty bad kind of thing. What Mr. Gorbachev did right, he pulled Soviet forces out of Afghanistan. That was a very timely decision. And then also what he did, he inadvertently removed fear out of the system, which was glued together only by fear. Yesterday we talked that socialism can only survive by fear, People would work only if there is a gun pointed at them. And if you remove the gun, nobody works anymore. And so that's exactly what happened under perestroika, because Mr. Gorbachev was all the time talking about socialism with a human face. And we couldn't figure out what does he mean, but the socialism was gone. Everybody on the good side, everybody stopped working almost overnight. Then also Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe was a catalyst of change for us in the Soviet Union. That Solidarity, for example, as a Polish trade union, free trade union, they elected Lech Wałęsa as the first Polish free president of Free Poland. Lech Wałęsa was pretty good. He would say, and I agree with him, that socialism was designed as a system of no return. His point was very difficult to get out of it. He usually would say that it's like you can make a fish soup from aquarium, but it's very difficult to make aquarium out of the fish soup. So that's, I think that was pretty good. Then Hungary opened its border with Austria, and people streamed from German Democratic Republic, which was not democratic, not a republic. They moved to Austria, Czechoslovakia. Also, the people began to run away. Nicolae Ceausescu was a Romanian dictator. It was amazing that the chief economic advisor to President Clinton was Lord Andrea Tyson. And she wrote a book in 1986, which was her PhD economics dissertation, called Comparative Economists of Eastern Europe, in which she proclaimed that Romania of Ceausescu is the most successful economy in the world. Because Mr. Ceausescu would present it like they have 14% economic growth per year. 14% economic growth per year. And I remember at that time I was consulting with something called Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. That was like a communist bloc. We called it dearly Council for Mutual Economic Destruction. And my colleague there from Romania, his name was Jan Draculescu, and we also called him Dracula. And I saw Dracula. Well, he was famous for, he would smell alcohol even at 8 o'clock in the morning. And so when I saw him, I said, Dracula, how do you make statistics? How do you fake statistics? He said, we don't fake statistics. I said, well, you're a friend. He said, we make statistics. I said, what's the difference between fake and make? He said, you need to have some statistics to fake it. But if you, but if you make it from scratch. Yeah. His point is, you make it from scratch. And I said, how do you make it from scratch? He said, you look at the ceiling, and then you see numbers there. And I said, are you looking at the ceiling? I don't see anything. He said, have a drink. And at a certain point, you will see numbers. You take them down and bring it to your boss, and your boss will correct you. That's how statistics is being made. And amazingly enough, that esteemed Laura D'Andrea Tyson, who was advising our misadvised president, that she believed into this statistics from the ceiling. So then, was the fall of Berlin Wall. Fall of Berlin Wall, I was kind of privileged that 2 days after the fall of Berlin Wall, I was invited to visit with Paul Samuelson. Maybe you heard Paul Samuelson was a Nobel laureate in economics, and he was teaching at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I had mutual friends in Washington, D.C. who organized this meeting, thinking that maybe he will help me in getting a job in the United States. So I visited with Mr. Samuelson, who was the only resemblance to good economist was that he was like Murray Rothbard. He had a bow tie, almost on a T-shirt, and he had shorts and sandals with a bow tie. So he resembled, but that resemblance with Murray Rothbard ended right there, because he was a kind of a very bad economist. And they translated his book into Russian under communism. And in this book, he had this graph. And the graph was that Soviet rates of economic growth like this, and US growth rates like this, and so Soviet Union would overtake United States in per capita income by the year 1990. And I that was very bad of me, but I couldn't refrain from asking him. I said, Dr. Samuelson, it's only 2 months left before 1990. Do you they can still make it and overtake United States? And he said, who could know that it's a hoax? And recently I looked at the latest edition of his book, and he has the same very graph there, but instead of Soviet Union and United States, it's China and the United States, and the year is 2022. Well, because he died already, so nobody can make any statements. Yes, this was the group which was designing these economic reforms. And later I was also a member of this group. It was called Committee for Radical Economic Reform. And radical economic reform, you can see the birthmark is there. It's an unbiased photography. And in the middle is Mr. Balkin, whom I had a dubious pleasure of working with. And this was the biggest economist in the world, Mr. Aganbegyan. Yeah. So Soviet Union, Soviet perestroika, it failed miserably. It failed miserably because, again, there were no true economic reforms. There was not, because what is socialism? Socialism is abolition of private property. So instead of restoring private property, instead of privatizing everything, Soviets were kind of playing with something called cooperative property, collective property, and whatnot. And that doesn't work. I mean, it never would work. Soviet Union fell apart on the glorious night of 24th of December of 1991 when Russian Federation under Mr. Yeltsin declared its independence from the Soviet Union. Its independence from the Soviet Union. So the whole Soviet Union fell apart because you cannot keep the other republics together if Russia is out. And Mr. Yeltsin, he understood the nature of socialism. He was accusing Mr. Gorbachev all the time of trying to prop up the system, resuscitate the system which people hate. He was in the beginning very, very good in economics. He didn't like me for some reason. He all the time would call me Andrei, not Yuri. And once I revolted and I said, my name is actually Yuri. And he looked at me, it's just like furniture talking back. I mean, who cares? What's the difference? So he was kind of like Ivan the Terrible of Soviet bureaucracy. But Soviet Union, when it fell apart on 15 different countries. 15 different countries. They are all choosing their own path from Soviet slavery, from socialist slavery to freedom. And it's very interesting, especially for an economist, to have it's almost real world experiment when countries which were, all of them were equally broke under Soviet Union. The difference in standard of living was maybe 25%, for example, between Estonia or Belarus, which were star performers, so-called, under socialism, and, say, Tajikistan or Kyrgyzia, which were doing very poorly. And so the gross domestic product at that time, I think, was about, Soviet Union, was about maybe 6-7% of the US. And when I defected, I was debriefed by all intelligence services of the West. Most of them were not intelligent at all about what kind of numbers is that. Because CIA, a Central Intelligence Agency, they believed that Soviet economy is 65% of the US economy, which per capita would be like Canada. If you go to Soviet Union, you wouldn't see Canada there. You would see a completely destroyed country. And so I was telling them that I recalculated it, and I think it's 6 or 7%. And because nobody believed me in these intelligence services, so when I came to the United States, I was invited to meet with Dick Cheney. You remember, maybe he was vice president under President Bush. And at that time, when I came to the United States, he was Secretary of Defense. So I met with Mr. Cheney, and he was looking through some papers, probably protocols of my debriefings, and he said, you think that Soviet economy is 6 to 7% of the US economy, and CIA believes it's 65, and the British think it's 55%. I think, he said, that truth is in between. I said, you're right, Mr. Secretary, it's between 6 and 7%. And what was pretty funny, that Mr. Cheney, he smiled ear to ear, and he said, sweet. Was completely unexpected reaction. So he was very smart, definitely, but I wouldn't go hunting with him no matter what. You know that he almost killed his friend hunting. And so these countries went their own way. So the gross domestic product in Soviet Union was about $2,000 per person. So now, for example, in a country called Estonia, it is $36,000. In Latvia and Lithuania, it's around $30,000. In Russia, it's about $8,000. In Ukraine, it's $4,000. And in Belarus, it's about $2,000. So you can see that countries which went different ways, those who have chosen the path of freedom, path of liberty, economic freedom, they achieved the best. I mean, it looks like Adam Smith, Milton Friedman, Ludwig von Mises, Hayek were absolutely right that the only source of wealth is freedom, nothing else, nothing else. Then, So what Mr. Gorbachev tried to do? At first, they came up with something called 500-day plan, how to get out of social, why 500 days plan. When I saw this plan, I immediately wrote my own, called Maltsev, that's my last name, one-day plan. One-day plan, because 500-day plan already sounds idiotic. And many people understood that. At that time, Margaret Thatcher, she was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, she said, it doesn't sound right, 500 days. It will be the same as in the United Kingdom. We would decide to drive on the right side instead of on the left side and do it in 500 days. And the first 100 days, only the big lorries will go on the right. And that was really completely idiotic. You cannot change the system overnight. Von Mises, he understood that very well. His point was that there is no third way between slavery and freedom. You're either here or there. You cannot be a little bit pregnant. So this is the very, very important thing for us to keep in mind. Yeah, this is all. If you would like to have this presentation, because I just don't want to, I think everybody is tired of this kind of stuff. And yes, so what if we will talk a little bit about successes, about economic success. This is Republic of Estonia. This is the flag and this is the map. And this is the Prime Minister, whom I had a privilege to meet. I was had a speech at Milwaukee Business Club, and there was one person. He all the time would say, "You cannot ignore Russian economy. It's 140 million people." Because my point was, if you want to invest somewhere, go to Costa Rica or Thailand, but don't go to Russia. And this person was all time objecting, and I said, why not? I mean, you can ignore whatever you wish to ignore. And next morning he's calling me and he said, I'm vice president of Kikkoman Foods. You know, Kikkoman, a soy sauce company, a Japanese company. And he said, we decided to go to Russia and we want to hire you as a consultant. I said, you probably didn't understand, maybe because of my accent, anything that I was talking about yesterday. He said, no. He said, it looks like you're a level-headed person, so we would like to hire you. How much do you charge per hour? And I was thinking, how much? I didn't know how much. And I said, $35 per hour. It was a long pause, and he said, can we make it 100 at least? And I said, 100, you don't know, maybe I'm a slow worker. He said, this is irrelevant. And so they hired me and I told them, I said, how about going to Lithuania instead of Russia? And can you imagine American businessman? He said, Lithuania sounds like a cold medicine. And like, you know, cough syrup is Lituanica. And I said, how about Estonia? He said, Estonia, what are these places? I said, the former parts of Soviet Union. And so he said, well, what if you will write us a business proposal and we will go to wherever you want to go. And at that time, nobody knew about these countries. I remember I called my long-distance phone company and I said, how can I call Estonia? And the lady said, what is her extension? Thinking that this is a lady in the office. And so I called Mr. Lahr from Wisconsin already in the United States. And I called his office, and his secretary, she said, I don't speak English much, so what if I'll put you through? And the Prime Minister picks up the phone, and he said, how may I help you? I said, my name is Yuri Maltsev, I'm calling from Wisconsin. He immediately interrupted me, and he said, it's a very nice place to call from with your kind of name. So that was kind of the beginning of. I said we would like to meet you because we want to make soy sauce. He said, so what is that for? And I said, well, for fish. Oh, we have fish, yeah. Why would you like to meet me? I said, well, why not? He said, yes, why not? and so we arranged a date, and so we are flying, and all the Japanese people came from Japan, and we're meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning at Prime Minister's office. Now we're very good friends with Mr. Lahr, but then it was the first time I'm meeting with Prime Minister of Estonia, and he became Prime Minister when he was 32 years old. He was 32 years old, and he said, well, you know what? He said, when I became Prime Minister, we had $24,000 in our treasury, and we had billions of worthless Lenin's pictures, that means Soviet rubles, in the basement. So what could I do? He said, the first week we legalized prostitution, gambling, and firearms. He said, now you can buy firearms, he said, at the gas station or at the children's store without showing your driver's license. And Mr. Sameyev, who was president of Kikkoman, he said, why not without driver's license? And Mr. Lahr, he said, pedestrians, sir, can be pissed off as well. And was pretty interesting, yes. And amazingly enough, I was in Estonia many times under Soviet Union, and it was a very sleazy place. There was a lot of prostitution, a lot of black market activities. It was the so-called sex tourism from Germany, from Scandinavia. Rich guys would come. It was like Cuba of today. And after he legalized everything went into yellow pages. You don't see prostitutes, you don't see pimps, you don't see anything, because it's all in. And Mr. Lahr, he said, I'm not sure that they are diligently writing tax returns, but we don't have crime dropped 80%. And I said, well, if you are such a libertarian, why wouldn't you legalize drugs? He said, I tried to, but it was a calls from US and British ambassadors the same day, and they told me that you have a Russian bear behind your back. And why would you like to spoil your relations with the West on this issue of drugs? And Mr. Sameyev, the president of Kikkoman from Japan, he said, drugs are bad. And the prime minister, he has this, he smiled like this, and he said, really, I don't know. I never tried drugs, but but he said, I know some people like them very much. And then he said, that we didn't legalize drugs, but I can assure you that we don't prosecute for them either. So that was pretty, and sure enough, Estonia today, when I came back, I wrote several articles about that with self-descriptive titles, a little country that could, the best government in the world, and on like that. So, and Estonia had the highest rates of economic growth in Europe, and I can assure you that they were not taking these rates from the ceiling. So then they privatized everything, almost overnight, and so that was a pretty kind of, then unfortunately Mr. Lahr was voted out of office, and they joined the European Union. And he wrote an article, famous article in the Wall Street Journal saying, from one union to another, from one union to another. So Estonia today is one of the most developed countries, especially in the field of internet technology, IT. They have something called e-Estonia or e-government. Then the good thing, it's not on the slide, but the good thing that you can, if you log in into the government portal, Estonia, then you can see everything the government has about you. Nobody else can see it, but you can see everything from parking tickets to your tax return to whatever else is. And you can object to that. If information is not correct, then you can deal without it. Then they all the time they are doing very, very well. So there's a huge difference. This is Cuba, for example. This is Cuba. This is the store, Cuban store, and you can see they don't have anything except right there. They had on this well, it said bebida. They had a baking soda, and I made a stupid joke over there that you should put people, which is not rationed. You can buy any amount of baking soda in Cuba. And I asked, what's that for? And they said, well, you can brush your teeth, you can treat your ulcers, you can do a lot of things with baking soda. You can wash things. And I said, well, you need to put people who are in charge of baking soda in charge of everything. And they were pretty vicious. But if you can see, they have these rations, unbelievable. 175 grams of vegetable oil per month per person. Milk only if you have children. Then they kind of, from Hindu religion, they borrowed the idea that you cannot have cows and bulls and whatever. So this is Comrade Lenin. And speaking about Baltic states, the other countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, they're also doing very well. In Lithuania, for example, their president told me that it takes them about 2 weeks to translate Estonian laws into Lithuanian and push them through their Seimas, through their Congress. So this is something called Park of Fallen Foibles in Vilnius, Lithuania. So they put all this Soviet mass murderers in the park, and if you will, it will be probably on the level of that farthest corner. There was also a monument to Lenin. And one young Lithuanian, he put a bridge over Lenin. And for 2 liters, which would be about 40 cents US, you could go and pee on Lenin. And there was some modest line of people who were trying to do. I was there with my students, and sure enough, female students were they said this is a very sexist entertainment. So then Lenin and all communists, they hate, and Keynesians as well, they hate gold. Gold is considered to be the most awful thing. And this one Chinese billionaire, he built this toilet because Lenin used to say that gold is good to make toilet commodes because it doesn't rust and whatnot. So we will build urinals and toilet commodes out of gold. And one Chinese businessman, he built this thing as a conversation topic. But amazingly enough, it cost him $7.2 million to build this. And now the market price is about $30 million. So that's kind of all this Lenin's ideas were wrong. So and again, the Hayek, he was, I think, the most prominent critic of socialism, and he, fortunately for him, he saw the beginning and the end of this dreadful society. On this cheerful note, I think I would be happy to take some questions or comments, and I am very happy to be here in Brazil. And the Von Mises Institute in Brazil definitely dwarfs Mises Institutes from anywhere else in the world. It's just amazing because in Auburn we never can get the crowd like this, and this intelligent people who. It's always a pleasure for me to talk to during the breaks. It's I hope to see you in the United States. We have a lot of events also at the Mises Institute there. All right. Well, thank you very much, and maybe questions.
Bom, obrigada, Yuri, por essa experiência fantástica de podermos contar com a sua experiência tão sofisticada sobre tudo o que você viveu, sentiu, e poder estar discutindo isso com auditório, com tantos jovens, né, que jamais experimentaram e talvez nunca experimentarão o que são esses regimes de horror. Então, para nós é uma satisfação É muito grande poder contar com a sua presença aqui. Primeira pergunta para o Yuri é que muitas pessoas alegam que a União Soviética ela enviou astronautas para o espaço sideral, ela fez satélites, e isso seria uma prova de que uma comunidade socialista, comunista, ela pode ser bem-sucedida por causa desse tipo de incremento. Como você responderia a esse argumento?
Well, on one side, they would send satellites to space and send people to space. On another hand, 51% of rural hospitals in the Soviet Union didn't have sewer system or running water. Can you imagine you do a surgery and then after surgery you need to go to the outhouse and the nurse will pull some water from the well and heat it up to clean you if you give a bribe. Life expectancy in Soviet Union when it fell was 57 for men and 66 for women. This is statistics of the least developed countries. So from one hand, they were building these Egyptian pyramids all over the place. From another hand, people's needs were ignored in the most atrocious way. They spent in 1989, the year that I defected, they spent $37 per person for medical help. 37, if you divide medical budget of the Soviet Union by the number of people, it would be $37 per person. So nobody cared about the slaves. But people, like in ancient Egypt, the government cared about pyramids, about Bolshoi theater, about people being sent to space. So this was the most awful thing. That when people were dying because of the absence of healthcare, primitive healthcare. I was in the Soviet army for 1 month only, and I thought I will die there. So I was simulating all kind of diseases and was put into the medical ward, and then I was helping the medical corps officers. And he gave me a big jar of aspirin, saying, sit and give aspirin away. So if a person would come with bleeding legs or feet or something, give him aspirin. And that was it, yes. There was nothing else, yes. Now we had Mr. Obama wanted to do that as well, and with the socializing healthcare in the United States. Well.
Yuri, uma outra questão importante aqui, nós sabemos que para a liberdade ela ser sustentada, muitas vezes ela deve estar no coração do povo. O povo ele deve amar a liberdade, né? Mais do que a servidão. E uma questão que surgiu é porque o povo russo, qual características que você observa que poderia até, não sei se isso procede, se poderia generalizar, se isso seria apressado, mas se existe alguma característica que faria daquele povo um povo mais subserviente a esses regimes autoritários, a esses tiranos, e por que a liberdade talvez não estivesse ou não esteja no coração daquele povo?
Well, my favorite Russian philosopher is Pyotr Chadaev, who lived in the beginning of the 19th century, and he wrote a wonderful autobiography, maybe it's translated into Portuguese, with a self-descriptive title, Notes from a Madhouse. And even in 1829, he was saying that Russia is a collectivist country because of the collective ownership of land, because that's why the collectivism was deeply ingrained into Russian political life and Russian spirit. The first sentence of his book is even self-descriptive. I am drinking my vodka, he wrote, and looking at the fireplace. And I'm thinking, why the God in his wisdom created such an absurdity as Mother Russia? And it occurred to me to teach mankind some awful lesson all the time. He wrote it almost 100 years before that deadly revolution, but he, I think, could foresee the results of collectivism. That's one thing. Another thing was that the whole combination of the First World War. Hans Hoppe, he wrote a wonderful essay which is called The First World War and the End of Civilization. And it was the end of civilization. It was. First World War produced Soviet communism, German fascism, Nazism, so concentration camps, mass murder, that was all the byproducts of the First World War. And I think that, and moreover, not many people know also in the West, and they don't teach that in schools, that the last drop in the bucket of Tsarism was that Tsar Nicholas II, the last emperor of Russia, he introduced prohibition in 1916. His point was that during the war effort, nobody should be, like Gorbachev, nobody should be drunk at that time. And so they introduced prohibition, which was fiercely enforced against soldiers and peasants and workers, but ruling classes were celebrating, were kind of being drunk in public. People like Rasputin, maybe you heard of him, that he was all the time kind of in the focus of the public attention. And definitely social envy became unbearable, and that's what ended up, because then Lenin came up with the ideas, loot the looters, that you are poor because they are rich. And that kind of played very well. That's how it plays today in the United States and in Europe and here in Brazil.
Por fim, então, a última questão, algumas perguntas também pedindo para o Yuri, pedindo para que o Yuri relate como foi a deserção dele, a chegada nos Estados Unidos e como foi esse processo.
Oh, it's a question how I defected, right? I don't like the word to defect, because to defect means to betray something you believed in, which I never did. And I was in 1989, in May, I was summoned to my boss, Mr. Abalkin, who was here on one of these pictures, and he said, well, you need to go to Finland. He was supposed to go. You need to go to Finland and do some lectures about perestroika. So I went to Finland, and in Finland, nobody can defect from Finland, and because Finns would return you back to Soviet Union, you will get 12 years of hard labor in Siberia, and again, you only live 2 or 3 there, then you die. And I was not looking for this kind of career change at all. And so, but in Finland, I had some kind of like a strange day. I had a speech at the Ministry of Finance of Finland, and I am doing this speech, and I see that they are serving food in an adjacent room. And I was thinking, I will eat here and save some money and buy more gifts to comrades. Because when I was leaving Soviet Union for Finland, a lot of my colleagues came to my office and were asking me to bring something from Finland. I even asked my secretary to take notes, who wants what, because I was running for Supreme Soviet, for Soviet Parliament at that time, and I'm thinking I will buy some votes with the cheap stuff. And so at the end of the day, I said, Elena, what is going on? I mean, who wants what? And she said, women, they want lipstick and mascara, and the ugly ones want floppy disks. Well, in the United States, you cannot say ugly ones. You should say maybe optically challenged or differently endowed or something like that. Yeah. But I'm quoting her. And she said, and the men, they want, you know what? And I knew what. Everybody wanted condoms. And why condoms? Because that in 1989 was an AIDS scare all over the world. Everybody was afraid of AIDS. And I was so surprised that I even looked, the Soviet Union was producing 7 million condoms for 300 million people. And so that's so there was a black market commodity and whatnot. So in Finland, I was buying a lot of all of this above and whatever. And then, and that's why I wanted to eat this food to save some money and to buy more at the Ministry of Finance. But when I shut up, then many people, instead of going there, they surrounded me and were asking me more questions. And I thought the smart ones will eat everything, and I will be paying again. And so I was kind of outraged by that. And one person, he was saying, you were so critical to socialists. Are you afraid of going back? And if I would say no, and that would be the case, then probably I'll be still in Moscow. But I said, I don't know why. I said, do you have other options? And he said, well, if you're looking for options, we can do something. I said, well, go ahead and do it. And then he asked me, the only thing, what's the hotel I'm staying? So when I came to my hotel, was a message called Walden ASAP, ASAP. That means as soon as possible, as soon as possible. At that time, my English was much worse, and I thought ASAP is some kind of maybe Persian person or Turk. And so I'm calling to call Mr. ASAP, and he picks up the phone, and I said, and I realized who is that. And he said, let's go to Sweden tomorrow. I said, Sweden? Why Sweden? I looked at my appointment book. I said, no, I'm all booked tomorrow. And then he said, so you cannot squeeze defection into your tight schedule. And then I realized what he's talking about. I looked at my schedule. I said, Friday. He was laughing again. Friday is defection day. I said, yeah, I'm going back to Soviet Union, so it will be good. Nobody would look for me. And so we went in a roundabout way, like a James Bond, to northern Finland, took a ferry boat to Sweden. I took a train, walked into the US Embassy, asked for political asylum. And the Marine Guard, he said, okay, sir, but embassy is closed. Come back on Monday after 10 o'clock. And I was at that time illegal immigrant, and I had an old Finnish visa, and so I was, well, illegal immigrant also you cannot say in the United States, undocumented worker. And so I was undocumented worker, and I was pretty much afraid of the KGB as well. And so unfortunately, they kind of accepted me, whatever, and then the whole summer they would send all these people who would like to find out from intelligence services to find out what's happening with Soviet economy. And then at a certain point, I got my ticket and I'm arriving to Kennedy Airport in New York, and I'm going through customs, and there's a big lady, the customs lady. She looked at my Soviet suitcase. I had already another one I bought on the flea market in Sweden, but she looked at my Soviet, she said, can you please open that? So I'm opening this suitcase, and there are like big boxes of lipstick, mascara, condoms, and floppy disks. And she said, is that for private use or that's business samples? And even Soviet economists would say, for private use. She took my passport and she said, oh, but you're coming for good. I said, hopefully. And she said, I wouldn't let you in for a weekend trip with this. And so the funny thing was that I told the same story. I have a good friend, Martin Walker from United Kingdom. He was a telegraph bureau chief in Moscow in the same time. That's when I met him. And I told him this story. And he said in the same year, he was going with Julie, his wife, to Moscow. And Julie was 8 months pregnant. And he was carrying a lot of condoms to give to his Soviet friends, And the Soviet customs officer, he asked him to open his suitcase, and there were a lot of condoms over there. And the Soviet customs officer looked at Julie, who was pregnant, and looked at these condoms. He said, looks like the same shit as ours. So that's, and then this lady, the customs lady, she said, welcome to the United States. Smiled ear to ear. So that was pretty kind of strange experience.
Bom, nosso tempo está esgotado e só para lembrá-los de que, normalmente, os melhores defensores da liberdade que eu já conheci ou eram socialistas ou passaram por experiências cruéis como a que o Yuri passou. Então, jamais desprezemos o potencial humano de defender a liberdade, inclusive naqueles oponentes mais radicais. Eles vão poder usar, muitas vezes, aquele radicalismo em função de ideias que realmente funcionam em prol da grande sociedade. Eu peço a todos vocês que não saiam, porque nós temos agora a premiação dos artigos, vai ser uma breve cerimônia e para encerrar a Conferência Austríaca em grande estilo. Novamente, eu agradeço o Yuri, estamos profundamente felizes, profundamente honrados, e o brilho que você conferiu à nossa conferência, ele jamais será esquecido por todos que aqui estão. Muito obrigada.
Well, and I wish you freedom and prosperity, definitely.